Annie Bennet stood before the grand doors of Ashford Manor, with nothing but borrowed courage and a dying father's last wish. The Duke of Ashford had lost his bride years ago and built walls no one dared breach. But when Annie whispered those impossible words, "They said you need a wife," something shifted in the shadows of that cold marble hall. What began as desperation would become a scandal that shook Victorian England, a marriage that defied every rule, and a love that neither of them saw coming. The rain had soaked through Annie Bennet's only good dress by the time she reached the iron gates of Ashford Manor. She stood there, trembling not from cold but from the weight of what she was about to do. 23 years old, orphaned 3 weeks ago, and facing eviction in 2 days. Her father's final words echoed in her mind like a prayer she was terrified to speak aloud. "Go to the Duke. He will remember me. He will help you." The manor loomed before her, all grey stone and mullioned windows that caught the dying light like disapproving eyes. Annie had never been inside a place like this. She had scrubbed floors in houses far humbler, mended dresses for women who would never acknowledge her on the street. But this was different. This was desperation wearing its Sunday clothes. A butler answered her knock, his face a mask of practiced disdain as he took in her sodden hem and work-worn hands. "I need to see the Duke of Ashford," Annie said, forcing her voice not to shake. "Please, it is urgent. His Grace does not receive visitors without appointment. Tell him it is about Thomas Bennet. Tell him Thomas Bennet's daughter needs to speak with him." Something flickered in the butler's eyes. He left her standing in the entrance hall, water pooling beneath her shoes on marble so white it seemed to glow. Annie wrapped her arms around herself, trying to look smaller, less intrusive in this space of polished grandeur. When footsteps echoed from the staircase, she looked up. Frederick Ashford, 10th Duke of Ashford, descended with the careful control of a man who had forgotten how to move with ease. He was 32 but carried himself like someone much older, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples, his grey eyes holding a distance that spoke of old grief. He wore black still, she noticed. Years after losing his bride, he still wore mourning clothes. "You are Thomas Bennet's daughter," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, Your Grace." Annie dropped into an awkward curtsy, her dress leaving a dark stain on the floor. "I'm sorry to intrude. I would not have come if there was any other way." He studied her with an intensity that made her want to flee, but she held her ground, lifting her chin even as her hands shook. "Your father was a good man. He helped me once when I needed it most. I am sorry for your loss." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Annie blinked rapidly, refusing to cry in front of this powerful stranger. "He made me promise to come to you," she said, the words tumbling out before courage could abandon her. "He said you would understand. He said you might help me." "Help you how?" Annie took a breath that felt like drawing water into drowning lungs. "They said you need a wife," she whispered, shame burning her cheeks. "I know it is improper. I know I have no right to suggest such a thing, but I have nowhere else to turn. I will be on the streets in 2 days. I can work. I can learn. I would not be a burden, I swear it." The silence that followed was excruciating. The Duke's face revealed nothing, but she saw his hands tighten behind his back. "Who told you I need a wife?" "Everyone says it, Your Grace. The servants talk. The merchants. They say society pressures you to marry again, to produce an heir. They say you have refused every suitable lady in 3 counties. And what makes you think I would consider someone so entirely unsuitable?" The words should have cut, but there was no cruelty in his tone, only a strange, hollow curiosity. "I do not think you would," Annie said honestly. "But my father believed you to be a man of honor, a man who pays his debts. He saved your life once, did he not? When the scaffolding collapsed during the renovation of the East Wing?" The Duke's expression shifted, something ancient and painful moving behind his eyes. "He did. I would have died if he had not pulled me clear. He refused any reward. He did not want money," Annie said softly. "He wanted to know there was still goodness in the world, that powerful men could be kind." Frederick Ashford turned away, walking to the rain-streaked windows. When he spoke again, his voice was different, lower, weighted with something she could not name. "I have no need of a love match, Miss Bennet. Society demands I marry, produce an heir, maintain appearances. Every eligible woman in England has been paraded before me by ambitious mothers who see only a title and an estate. I have no interest in that game." He turned to face her, and Annie saw something new in his expression. Not pity, but a kind of weary recognition. "What if I proposed a different arrangement? A marriage of convenience. You would have protection, security, a name that shields you from poverty. I would have a wife to silence the gossips and satisfy the demands of duty. Nothing more would be required of you." Annie's heart hammered against her ribs. She had come here hoping for employment, perhaps a small cottage on the estate. This was beyond anything she had imagined. "You would marry me?" she asked, disbelief sharpening her voice. "A woman with no dowry, no connections, no education beyond what my father could teach me?" "I would marry you because you are honest," the Duke said, "because you came here without pretense or manipulation, because your father was a man I respected, and honoring his final wish honors his memory, and because, Miss Bennet, I suspect you need this alliance as much as I do." There was a logic to it that made a strange kind of sense, but Annie could not shake the feeling that she was stepping off a cliff into darkness. "What if you come to regret it?" she asked. "What if society turns against you for marrying so far beneath your station? Let them talk. I stopped caring about society's opinion years ago. And what would you expect of me?" He moved closer, and Annie caught the scent of sandalwood and something else, something distinctly masculine that made her pulse quicken despite herself. "I would expect you to be mistress of this house in name," the Duke said, "to attend necessary social functions at my side, to be treated with the respect due a duchess. Beyond that, you would have your own quarters, your own life. I would not impose upon you in any way that made you uncomfortable." His grey eyes held hers, and Annie saw the loneliness there, the careful walls he had built around himself. This was a man who had loved and lost and chosen never to risk his heart again. She thought of the cold room she would be evicted from, the uncertain future stretching before her like a winter road with no end. She thought of her father's faith in this man, his dying wish that she come here. "I accept," she said, the words both terrifying and liberating. "I will marry you, Your Grace." Something flickered across his face, too quick to read. He extended his hand, and when she took it, his palm was warm and steady against her cold fingers. "Then we have an arrangement, Miss Bennet. I will have the contracts drawn up. We will marry quietly, with minimal fuss, and I will ensure you are never cast aside or made to suffer want again." "Thank you," Annie whispered. "I will not disappoint you." As the Duke called for the housekeeper to prepare a room for her, Annie felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. She had come here a beggar and would leave a duchess. But as she climbed the stairs to rooms she could never have imagined occupying, she could not shake the feeling that she had just made a bargain she did not fully understand, and that the loneliness in the Duke's eyes was a mirror of something in her own heart she had never dared to name. The wedding took place 4 days later, in the small stone chapel at the edge of Ashford village. Annie had expected something grander, but the Duke insisted on simplicity. Perhaps he wanted to avoid spectacle, perhaps he simply did not care. She wore a dress the housekeeper had altered for her, pale blue silk that whispered against her skin like a secret. It had belonged to the Duke's mother, Mrs. Hartley explained, while fastening the tiny buttons along Annie's spine. The old Duchess would have wanted it worn again, she said, her weathered hands surprisingly gentle. Annie studied herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. Her dark hair had been arranged in soft curls, a few loose tendrils framing her face. The dress fit as though made for her, emphasizing a figure she had never thought much about. She looked like someone who belonged in paintings, in ballrooms, in places she had only glimpsed through windows. "You are lovely, miss," Mrs. Hartley said softly. His Grace is a fortunate man, but Annie wondered if the Duke saw her at all, or only a solution to a problem he had grown weary of managing. The chapel was nearly empty. A handful of staff members sat in the back pews, their faces carefully neutral. The vicar waited at the altar, his expression kind but curious. No family, no friends, just two people entering a legal arrangement that would bind them for life. Frederick stood at the altar in black, as always, his posture rigid with the control she was beginning to recognize as his armor against the world. When she walked down the short aisle, his eyes found hers, and something shifted in his expression. Not love, not yet, but something softer than indifference. "You look well," he said quietly as she reached his side, and the compliment, small as it was, warmed something inside her chest. "Thank you, Your Grace. Frederick. When we're alone, you may call me Frederick." The ceremony was brief, the words ancient and binding. Annie's voice trembled only once, when she promised to honor and cherish him. It felt like a lie and a hope tangled together. And then the vicar said the words that changed everything. "You may kiss your bride." Frederick turned to her, and Annie saw uncertainty flicker across his face. He moved slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. His hand came up to cup her cheek, gentle and warm, and then his lips touched hers. It was meant to be quick, perfunctory, a formality to seal their vows. But the moment their mouths met, something ignited between them. Frederick's hand tightened slightly on her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. Annie's breath caught, her fingers clutching the front of his jacket without thinking. The kiss lasted only seconds, but it felt like falling and flying at once. When they pulled apart, Frederick's grey eyes were darker, searching her face as though seeing her for the first time. Annie's heart hammered so loudly she was certain everyone in the chapel could hear it. "We are married," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Yes," Annie whispered. "We are." The ride back to Ashford Manor was quiet, the carriage wheels crunching over gravel as grey clouds gathered overhead. Annie sat across from Frederick, acutely aware of every breath, every small movement. He watched the passing countryside, but she caught him glancing at her when he thought she was not looking. At the manor, he helped her down from the carriage, his hand lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "I will show you to your rooms," he said. "You should rest, it has been an eventful day." Her rooms were in the east wing, connected to his by a shared sitting area. The bedroom was larger than any space she had ever occupied, all cream silk and polished mahogany, with windows overlooking the rose garden. A fire crackled in the hearth, driving away the autumn chill. "These were prepared for you," Frederick said, standing in the doorway as though afraid to enter. "If you need anything changed, you need only ask Mrs. Hartley." "They are perfect," Annie said honestly. "I have never seen anything so beautiful." He nodded, but did not leave. Instead, he studied her with that same intense focus that made her feel exposed and seen in equal measure. "Annie, there is something I must make clear. This marriage, this arrangement, it does not obligate you to anything beyond what we discussed. Your rooms are your sanctuary. I will never enter without invitation. I will never force my presence upon you in any way." The formality of his words could not hide the vulnerability beneath them. This was a man who had been hurt, who protected himself by keeping everyone at a distance. "I understand," Annie said softly, "but Frederick, you need not treat me as though I might shatter. I am stronger than I look." Something almost like a smile touched his lips. "I'm beginning to see that." After he left, Annie explored her new domain, running her fingers over silk curtains and leather-bound books, feeling like an imposter in borrowed finery. But when she found a small portrait on the mantel, a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, reality crashed back. His first bride, the woman he had loved. The ghost Annie would always live beside. That evening, dinner was served in the small dining room, just the two of them at opposite ends of a table that could seat 20. It felt absurd and lonely, despite the fine food and candlelight. "This is ridiculous," Frederick said suddenly, setting down his fork. "Come, sit here." He gestured to the chair beside him, and after a moment's hesitation, Annie moved. The proximity felt different, more intimate, and she was painfully aware of his presence. "Tell me about your father," Frederick said. "What was he like when he was not rescuing careless dukes from falling beams?" Annie smiled, the first genuine smile since the ceremony. "He was kind, too kind perhaps. He gave away more than we could afford, helped people who never repaid him. He believed everyone deserved a second chance. He sounds like a rare soul." He was, and he believed you were too, despite what society says about aristocrats. "What does society say? That you are cold, heartless, that you shut yourself away after losing your betrothed and have no interest in the living world." Frederick was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight. "Perhaps they are not entirely wrong." "I think they are," Annie said, surprising herself with her boldness. A heartless man would not have agreed to marry an orphan with nothing to offer. A cold man would not have promised to protect someone he barely knows. His eyes met hers, and in the candlelight they looked almost warm. "You see things that are not there, Annie. Or perhaps I see things you have hidden away," she replied. The air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken things. Frederick reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers where they rested beside her plate. It was barely a touch, but Annie felt it like lightning. "I'm glad you are here," he said quietly. "I did not expect that, but it is true." "I am glad too," Annie whispered. They finished dinner in companionable silence, but everything had shifted. When Frederick walked her to her door later, he took her hand and lifted it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that made her breath stop. "Good night, Annie." "Good night, Frederick." She closed the door and leaned against it, her hand still tingling from his kiss. Through the walls she heard him moving in his own rooms, so close yet impossibly far away. Annie touched her lips, remembering the kiss at the altar, the way he had looked at her as though she mattered. This was meant to be a marriage of convenience, nothing more. But as she climbed into bed that felt like clouds, Annie wondered if convenience was all either of them truly wanted, and whether the careful distance Frederick maintained was protection for her heart or his own. Annie woke to sunlight streaming through windows she had forgotten to curtain. For a disorienting moment, she did not know where she was. Then memory returned in a rush. The wedding, the kiss, Frederick's grey eyes watching her across the dinner table. She was a duchess now. The thought felt ridiculous and terrifying in equal measure. Mrs. Hartley arrived with breakfast, and a knowing smile that suggested she had seen many uncertain brides before. "His Grace requests your presence in the morning room at 10, if you are agreeable. He wishes to discuss your duties as mistress of the household." Duties. The word settled like a stone in Annie's stomach. She knew nothing about running an estate, managing servants, hosting society. She was a fraud in silk dresses, and eventually everyone would see through the costume. But when she entered the morning room precisely at 10, Frederick's expression held no judgment. He stood when she entered, a gesture of respect that still surprised her. "Good morning, Annie. I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you. The bed is remarkably comfortable." A hint of amusement touched his lips. "I am glad my ancestors' taste in furnishings meets with your approval. Please sit. We have much to discuss." The next hour passed in a blur of household accounts, servant schedules, and social obligations. Frederick explained each responsibility with patience, never making her feel inadequate when she asked questions. "You need not master everything immediately," he said when he noticed her overwhelmed expression. "Mrs. Hartley will guide you. She has been with this family for 30 years and knows more about running Ashford than I do." "But I want to be useful," Annie said. "I want to be more than just a name on a marriage certificate." Frederick set down the ledger he had been holding and looked at her directly. "You are already more than that. You are my wife. That means something, regardless of how this marriage began." The intensity in his voice made her pulse quicken. Before she could respond, he stood abruptly. "Come, I want to show you something." He led her through corridors she had not yet explored, past portraits of stern-faced ancestors, and rooms shrouded in dust covers. Finally, he stopped before a set of double doors carved with intricate patterns. "This is the library," he said, pushing them open. "It is my refuge. I spend most evenings here." Annie stepped inside and gasped. The room soared 2 stories high, every wall lined with books from floor to ceiling. Sunlight poured through tall windows, illuminating leather spines in jewel tones. A fire crackled in an enormous hearth, and deep chairs invited hours of reading. "It is magnificent," she breathed. "My mother built this collection. She believed books were windows to lives we could never live ourselves." Frederick ran his hand along a shelf with something like reverence. "After she died, my father could not bear to enter. But I have always found peace here." "May I use it?" Annie asked. "I know I have no formal education, but my father taught me to read and I love stories. This room is as much yours as mine now," Frederick said. "In fact, I hoped you might join me here in the evenings, unless you prefer solitude." There was vulnerability in the offer, a carefully extended branch from a man unused to reaching out. "I would like that very much," Annie said. That evening, after dinner, she found him in the library as promised. He had changed from his formal coat into a burgundy smoking jacket, his hair slightly disheveled as though he had run his fingers through it. He looked younger, less guarded. "I did not know what you might enjoy," he said, gesturing to a stack of books on the table between two chairs. "So I selected a variety." Annie settled into the chair across from him, tucking her feet beneath her skirts. She chose a volume of poetry and opened it randomly, reading aloud because the silence felt too heavy. "She walks in beauty like the night, of cloudless climes and starry skies." "Byron," Frederick said. "My mother's favorite. She used to read it to me when I was a boy. Did she read to you often?" "Every night until I was too old to admit I still wanted her to." His expression softened with memory. She made every story feel like magic. "My father did the same," Annie said. "Even when he was exhausted from work, he would tell me tales of knights and dragons and brave maidens who saved themselves." "Saved themselves?" Frederick raised an eyebrow. "Not waiting for princes. He said the best stories were about people discovering they had the strength inside them all along. Your father was a wise man." They fell into comfortable silence, both reading, but Annie was intensely aware of Frederick's presence, the way he turned pages with long, elegant fingers, the furrow that appeared between his brows when he concentrated, the occasional smile that ghosted across his lips at something in his book. After an hour, he stood to add wood to the fire. Annie watched him work, the play of firelight across his features, the careful precision of his movements. "May I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. Do you regret marrying me?" "Not in theory, but in reality. Now that I am here, disrupting your ordered life." Frederick straightened, poker still in hand, and looked at her with an expression she could not decipher. "No," he said simply. "I do not regret it. Even though I know nothing of society. Even though I will embarrass you at parties and misuse the silver and call people by the wrong titles." He set down the poker and moved closer, crouching beside her chair so they were at eye level. The proximity stole her breath. "Annie, I have spent years surrounded by people who know every rule of etiquette, every subtle social maneuver. They are polished and perfect and utterly exhausting. You are real. You ask questions instead of pretending to know. You read poetry aloud because you genuinely love the words, not because it is fashionable. That is not something to apologize for." His hand rested on the arm of her chair, close enough that she could feel its warmth. "I worried you would find me boring," she admitted. "That you would regret choosing someone so ordinary. There is nothing ordinary about you." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Annie's heart hammered as Frederick's eyes dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes as though asking permission for something neither of them had named. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he reached up and tucked a loose curl behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and Annie's breath caught. "You have ink on your nose," he said softly. "I do?" "From the book binding. Here." He brushed his thumb across the bridge of her nose, a touch so gentle it felt like a question. Annie could not move, could not breathe, caught in the intensity of his gaze. "Frederick," she whispered, not knowing what she was asking. His hand slid from her face to her shoulder, then down her arm until his fingers intertwined with hers. He lifted her hand and pressed it against his chest over his heart. She could feel it racing beneath her palm as fast as her own. "I have not felt anything in so long," he said, his voice rough. "I thought I was incapable of it. But when you are near, I feel everything." "I feel it too," Annie confessed. "I did not expect to. I thought this would be an arrangement, nothing more. But I think about you constantly. Wonder what you're doing when we are apart. Count the hours until evening when I can see you again." His other hand came up to frame her face and he leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. "We should be careful," he murmured. This was meant to be simple. "Nothing about this feels simple," Annie said. "No," he agreed, "it does not." They stayed like that, breathing the same air, hovering on the edge of something that frightened and thrilled them both. The fire crackled. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Inside, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Finally, Frederick pulled back, though his hand still held hers. "It is late," he said, regret coloring his tone. "You should rest." Annie wanted to protest, to ask him to stay, to cross the final distance between them. But she also understood that Frederick needed control, needed to move slowly through waters that terrified him. "Tomorrow evening?" she asked. "Will you be here?" "Every evening," he promised, "for as long as you wish it." As Annie walked back to her rooms, her hand still tingled where he had held it. She could still feel the racing of his heart beneath her palm, the warmth of his breath against her skin. This marriage was becoming something neither of them had bargained for, and Annie was beginning to realize she wanted every complicated, terrifying, beautiful moment of it. The morning of the village market, Annie dressed with particular care. It would be her first public appearance as the Duchess of Ashford, and Frederick had insisted on accompanying her. He said it was important that society see them together, that she be introduced properly to the community. But as their carriage rolled into the village square, Annie felt every eye turn toward them. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Frederick helped her down, his hand firm and reassuring at her elbow. "Pay them no mind," he murmured. "They are simply curious." But Annie saw more than curiosity in those stares. She saw judgment, speculation, and barely concealed disdain. These people knew she did not belong among them. They walked through the market stalls, Frederick introducing her to merchants and local gentry with impeccable courtesy. Most responded with stiff politeness, their smiles not quite reaching their eyes. Annie kept her head high, her hand steady on Frederick's arm, determined not to show how much their coldness stung. Then a woman's voice cut through the crowd like a blade. "Well, well, the new Duchess of Ashford. How absolutely unexpected." Annie turned to see a woman approaching with the confidence of someone who owned every space she entered. She was perhaps 40, beautiful in a cold, sharp way, dressed in emerald silk that proclaimed wealth and status. Her dark eyes assessed Annie with the thoroughness of someone appraising livestock. "Lady Charlotte Pemberton," Frederick said, his voice carefully neutral. "May I present my wife Annie, Duchess of Ashford?" Lady Charlotte's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "How do you do, Your Grace?" She emphasized the title with delicate mockery. "Forgive my surprise. We had all assumed the Duke would choose someone from society, someone of appropriate breeding and education." Annie felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to meet the woman's gaze. "The Duke chose according to his own judgment, my lady. I am honored by his faith in me." "Faith," Lady Charlotte repeated, as though tasting the word. "How interesting. Tell me, Your Grace, did you know the Duke before this sudden marriage? Or was it perhaps an arrangement made hastily to address certain urgent circumstances?" The implication hung in the air like smoke. Several nearby conversations stopped. People leaned in, eager to hear the response. Frederick's hand tightened on Annie's arm, but she spoke before he could. "My father knew His Grace. They shared a bond of mutual respect. When my father passed, the Duke honored that friendship in the most generous way possible." "How very convenient for you," Lady Charlotte said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "A young woman alone in the world, no prospects, and suddenly elevated to Duchess. One might almost suspect ulterior motives. One might suspect many things, Lady Charlotte, but wisdom suggests waiting for facts rather than indulging in speculation." The older woman's eyes narrowed. "Facts. Yes, let us discuss facts. You married within weeks of arriving at Ashford Manor. The Duke, who refused every suitable woman in 3 counties, suddenly wed a complete unknown. And you, my dear, are what, 23? Young and fertile, one presumes. Tell me, how long until you announce an heir? Or have you already secured your position in the most time-honored way?" The accusation was clear. Lady Charlotte was suggesting Annie had seduced Frederick, perhaps even trapped him with a pregnancy. Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. Annie's vision narrowed, anger burning through embarrassment. She released Frederick's arm and stepped forward, meeting Lady Charlotte's malicious gaze with steel in her own. "You speak of honor and breeding, my lady, yet you stand in a public market making vile insinuations about a woman you do not know. You question my character while revealing your own. I married the Duke because he asked me, and I was honored to accept. What lies beneath that decision is between husband and wife, and certainly none of your concern." Lady Charlotte's face flushed with rage. "How dare you speak to me in such a manner? Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," Annie said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You are a woman who uses cruelty to maintain power, who tears others down because lifting yourself up requires too much effort. And I will not stand here and allow you to insult my husband or our marriage with your poisonous gossip." The crowd had gone silent. Annie was vaguely aware that she had just committed social suicide, but she did not care. She would not cower before this woman's venom. Then Frederick was beside her, his presence solid and commanding. "Lady Charlotte," his voice cut through the tension like ice, "you have insulted my wife in front of witnesses. Let me make something absolutely clear to you and everyone here. Annie is my wife, she is the Duchess of Ashford, and she will be treated with the respect that position demands. She married me because I chose her, because I recognized in her qualities that are sadly lacking in most of your so-called suitable women: intelligence, honesty, courage." He moved closer to Lady Charlotte, and though he did not raise his voice, every word carried weight. "If you or anyone else continues to spread malicious rumors about my Duchess, about our marriage or about her character, you will find yourselves no longer welcome in this county. I have influence, Lady Charlotte. More than you, I think. Do not test me on this." Lady Charlotte's face had gone white, then red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "You cannot threaten me," she spat. "I am not threatening. I am promising." Frederick's grey eyes were glacial. "Touch my wife's reputation again, and you will learn exactly how unpleasant I can be when properly motivated." He turned to Annie, and his expression softened completely. "Come, my dear. I believe we have completed our business here." As they walked back to the carriage, whispers exploded behind them. Annie's hands were shaking, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had just confronted one of the most powerful women in the county, and Frederick had defended her with a ferocity that left her breathless. When they were safely inside the carriage, Frederick took both her hands in his. "That was extraordinary," he said, and there was something like pride in his voice. "The way you stood up to her. I have never seen anyone refuse to be cowed by Charlotte Pemberton." "I may have just ruined your social standing," Annie said, the reality of what she had done crashing over her. "No, you reminded everyone that I chose you, that our marriage is real, not some shameful secret to be whispered about. And Annie, the way you defended me, defended us, it meant more than you can possibly know." His thumb traced circles on her wrist, and Annie felt her pulse jump beneath his touch. "She will retaliate," Annie said quietly. "Women like that always do." Frederick's jaw tightened. "Let her try. She will find I am far more formidable as an enemy than she anticipated." As the carriage rolled toward Ashford Manor, Annie leaned back against the seat, exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. She had made an enemy today, a powerful one, but she had also discovered something important. She was no longer the frightened girl who had arrived at the manor gates in the rain. She was Frederick's wife, and she would fight for that position with everything she had. And from the way Frederick looked at her, his grey eyes burning with something fierce and possessive, she suspected he was ready to fight too. But in the shadows of the village, Lady Charlotte stood watching the Duke's carriage disappear, her face twisted with rage. She had been humiliated, threatened, dismissed in front of witnesses, and she would make them both pay for it. 3 days after the confrontation in the village, dark clouds gathered over Ashford Manor like a bruise spreading across the sky. Annie stood at her bedroom window, watching the wind bend the trees, feeling restless in a way she could not name. She and Frederick had grown closer since that day in the market. Their evenings in the library had become charged with unspoken tension, every accidental touch lingering longer than necessary, every shared glance heavy with meaning neither dared voice aloud. Annie wanted more. She wanted to close the distance between them, to discover what lay beyond those careful walls Frederick had built. But she did not know how to ask for something she barely understood herself. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Annie remembered that the glass conservatory on the south side of the manor had several windows that did not latch properly. Frederick had mentioned intending to have them repaired, but the work had not yet been completed. If the storm hit with full force, those windows could shatter. Without thinking further, Annie grabbed a shawl and hurried through the corridors. The conservatory was Frederick's pride, filled with exotic plants his mother had collected from around the world. She would not let it be destroyed. The conservatory was a marvel of iron and glass, soaring high above beds of orchids and ferns that seemed almost tropical in their lush abundance. Rain had already begun, fat drops drumming against the glass roof with increasing urgency. Annie found the first loose window and struggled with the latch, standing on a bench to reach it. The wind fought her, pulling at her hair and dress. She managed to secure it and moved to the next. "What are you doing?" Annie nearly fell off the bench. Frederick stood in the doorway, his dark hair wind-blown, his expression torn between exasperation and something that looked like fear. "The windows," Annie called over the rising wind. "You said they needed repair. The storm will break them if they are not secured. You should have sent for the groundskeeper. This is dangerous." There was no time. She stretched for another latch, her fingers just brushing it. The bench wobbled beneath her, and Frederick was there, his hands gripping her waist, steadying her. "Get down," he said, his voice rough. "I will do it. We can do it together. It will be faster." For a moment she thought he would argue, but then he nodded. They worked in tandem, moving from window to window as the storm built outside. Rain lashed the glass with increasing violence. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the conservatory in stark white flashes. Annie was reaching for the final window when she heard it. A sharp crack followed by a groan of stressed metal. She looked up just as one of the large decorative panels in the glass roof began to tear loose, its iron frame twisting. "Annie, move!" Frederick's shout came too late. The panel was falling directly toward her, heavy glass and iron that would crush her where she stood. She froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. Then Frederick slammed into her, his arms wrapping around her body as he pulled her backward. They crashed together into a display of ferns, the panel smashing onto the stone floor exactly where Annie had been standing seconds before. Glass exploded in every direction, glittering like lethal diamonds. Annie could not breathe. Her heart hammered so hard it hurt. Frederick's body covered hers completely, his weight pressing her into the soft earth, his arms cradling her head protectively. For several seconds neither of them moved. Rain poured through the broken roof, drenching them. Thunder shook the very foundations of the conservatory. "Are you hurt?" Frederick's voice was raw against her ear. "Annie, tell me you are not hurt." "I am fine," she managed. "You saved me." He pulled back enough to look at her, and Annie saw something wild in his grey eyes, something uncontrolled and desperate. Rain streamed down his face. His hands framed her head, his thumbs brushing her cheeks as though confirming she was real, whole, alive. "I could have lost you," he said, and his voice broke on the words. "I could have lost you, and I would never have told you." "Told me what?" But Frederick did not answer with words. Instead, he lowered his mouth to hers and kissed her with an intensity that stole what little breath she had left. This was nothing like the chaste kiss at their wedding. This was hunger and fear and desperate relief all tangled together. His lips claimed hers with a possessiveness that made her gasp, and when her mouth opened, he deepened the kiss until Annie felt like she was drowning in sensation. Her hands fisted in his soaked shirt, pulling him closer even though there was no space left between them. Frederick groaned against her mouth, one hand sliding into her hair while the other gripped her waist, holding her as though she might disappear if he let go. Annie had never been kissed like this, had never known a kiss could be this consuming. She could taste rain on his lips, feel the thunder of his heartbeat against her chest. When his mouth left hers to trail burning kisses down her jaw to her throat, she made a sound she did not recognize, something between a gasp and a plea. "Annie," he breathed against her skin, and her name had never sounded like that before, rough and reverent at once. "God, Annie, I need you to know." "Know what?" Her voice was barely a whisper. He lifted his head, and the look in his eyes made her heart stop. "This is not convenience anymore. This is not an arrangement. I am falling for you. I have been falling since you walked into my home, with rain in your hair and defiance in your eyes. I am terrified of it, but I cannot stop it. I do not want you to stop it," Annie said, her hands coming up to cup his face. "I am falling too, Frederick. I think I have been since that first night in the library, when you let me see who you really are beneath all that careful control." He kissed her again, slower this time, but no less intense. His hand slid from her waist down the curve of her hip, pulling her more firmly against him, and Annie felt heat flood through her body in a way that had nothing to do with the storm. "We should go inside," Frederick murmured against her lips, though he made no move to release her. "You are soaked through. You will catch cold. So are you. I do not care." His thumb traced her lower lip, his eyes following the movement with an expression that made her breath catch. "All I care about is that you are safe, that you are here, that you are mine." "Yours," Annie agreed, the word feeling like both a promise and a prayer. Finally, reluctantly, Frederick helped her to her feet. They were both drenched, covered in dirt and leaves from the fern display. Annie's hair had come completely loose, hanging in wet tangles down her back. Frederick's shirt was torn at the shoulder where he had shielded her from the glass. They looked at each other and, despite everything, began to laugh. It was relief and joy and something wilder, something that made Annie feel reckless and alive in a way she never had before. Frederick took her hand and pulled her toward the manor, running through the rain as lightning split the sky. When they reached the entrance, he spun her against the wall in the empty corridor and kissed her again, his wet hands framing her face, his body pressing against hers in a way that made her dizzy with wanting. "I am not letting you go," he said between kisses. "Not tonight, not ever. Tell me you understand." "I understand." Annie gasped as his mouth found the sensitive spot below her ear. "Frederick, I understand." But even as desire burned between them, Frederick pulled back, his breathing ragged, his hands trembling slightly as they held her. "You should change into dry clothes," he said, though every word seemed to cost him. "We both should. Before we do something we have not properly discussed." Annie wanted to protest that she did not care about propriety or discussion, that she wanted everything he was holding back. But she also recognized the restraint in his eyes, the respect that made him pull away even when neither of them wanted him to. "Tonight," she said, making it a promise. "We talk tonight, about what this is, about what we both want." Frederick pressed his forehead to hers, his eyes closing. "Tonight," he agreed. No more distance, no more pretending this is something it is not. As Annie made her way to her rooms, her body still humming from his touch, she knew everything had changed. The storm had torn away the last of their careful defenses, and now they stood on the edge of something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Tonight, they would cross that final threshold together, and Annie could not wait. Before we continue with the rest of this story, if you have been enjoying this journey of Annie and Frederick, I would love for you to subscribe to the channel so you never miss what happens next. And tell me, what do you think Lady Charlotte will do to try to destroy their marriage? Leave your prediction in the comments. I read every single one and love hearing your thoughts. Now let us see what happens when the storm passes and the real battle begins. Annie stood before the fire in her sitting room, wrapped in a silk robe that clung to her still damp skin. She had bathed and changed, but her hair remained loose, drying in waves down her back. The storm continued outside, rain drumming steadily against the windows, thunder rumbling in the distance like a heartbeat. She could not stop trembling, and it had nothing to do with cold. The knock came softly, tentatively, as though Frederick was giving her every chance to send him away. "Come in," Annie said, her voice barely above a whisper. The door opened, and Frederick entered, closing it behind him with a quiet click that felt impossibly loud. He had changed as well, wearing dark trousers and a white shirt open at the collar, his hair still damp and curling slightly at the ends. He looked younger like this, less guarded and devastatingly handsome. For a long moment they simply stared at each other across the room, the air between them charged with everything unspoken. "I should not be here," Frederick said, but his feet carried him forward anyway. "This breaks every rule of the arrangement we made." "Then perhaps it is time to make a new arrangement," Annie replied. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the rapid rise and fall of his chest, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "Annie, if we do this, if we cross this line, there is no going back. This marriage becomes real in every way. I need to know that is what you want, not because you feel obligated, not because you are grateful, but because you truly want this, want me." The vulnerability in his voice undid her. Annie closed the distance between them, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. his heart hammered beneath her palms, as wild as her own. "I want you," she said, meeting his eyes without flinching. "I want this. I want us to be a real marriage, Frederick. I want to know what it feels like to be truly yours." His control shattered. Frederick's hands came up to frame her face, and he kissed her with the same desperate intensity as in the conservatory, but slower now, taking his time to explore her mouth as though memorizing every sensation. Annie melted against him, her arms winding around his neck, fingers threading through his damp hair. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. Frederick's thumb traced her swollen lower lip, his grey eyes dark with desire. "You are so beautiful," he murmured. "I have tried not to notice, tried to maintain proper distance, but Annie, you undo me completely." "Good," she said, surprising herself with her boldness, "because you undo me too." His hands slid down from her face to her shoulders, fingers finding the tie of her robe. He paused, giving her one last chance to refuse. Instead, Annie reached up and began unbuttoning his shirt, her fingers trembling but determined. Frederick sucked in a breath as her hands touched his bare chest, exploring the planes of muscle beneath warm skin. He was beautiful, she realized, all controlled strength and restrained power. And tonight, he was hers. The robe whispered to the floor, leaving Annie in only her thin nightgown. Frederick's eyes traveled over her with reverent hunger, and she felt beautiful under his gaze in a way she never had before. "Perfect," he breathed. "You are absolutely perfect." He lifted her into his arms, carrying her to the bed as though she weighed nothing. The sheets were cool and soft as he laid her down gently, his body following hers, covering her, but careful not to crush her with his weight. "Tell me if I frighten you," Frederick said, his voice rough. "Tell me if you want me to stop, and I will. Always." "Do not stop," Annie whispered. "Please do not stop." His mouth found hers again as his hands began to explore, sliding down her sides, over the curve of her hips, learning the shape of her through the thin fabric. Annie arched into his touch, her own hands roaming across his back, feeling muscles flex beneath her palms. When Frederick's lips left hers to trail down her throat, Annie gasped, her head falling back to give him better access. He took his time, kissing and tasting every inch of exposed skin, his hands never still, always touching, caressing, worshipping. "Frederick," she breathed, not even sure what she was asking for, only knowing she needed more. "I know," he murmured against her collarbone. "I know, love. I have you." His fingers found the tiny buttons of her nightgown and began unfastening them with aching slowness. Each new inch of exposed skin received his devoted attention, kisses pressed to her shoulders, the valley between her breasts, her stomach. Annie trembled beneath him, overwhelmed by sensation, by the tenderness in every touch. When the nightgown finally joined the robe on the floor, Annie expected to feel vulnerable, exposed. Instead, she felt powerful, desired, cherished. Frederick looked at her as though she was something sacred, something precious beyond measure. "You are everything," he said simply. "Everything I did not know I needed." He shed the rest of his own clothing and returned to her, skin against skin for the first time. The sensation was overwhelming, intoxicating. Annie pulled him closer, needing to feel every point of contact, to be as close as two people could possibly be. Frederick took his time, hands and mouth exploring every curve and hollow, learning what made her gasp, what made her moan his name. When Annie thought she might shatter from want alone, he finally positioned himself above her, his eyes locking with hers. "This may hurt at first," he said gently, "but I promise to be careful. Tell me if it becomes too much." Annie reached up to cup his face, drawing him down for a tender kiss. "I trust you," she said, "completely." He entered her slowly, carefully, watching her face for any sign of pain. There was discomfort, a stretching fullness that made her breath catch, but Frederick held still, giving her time to adjust, pressing kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Breathe, love," he murmured. "Just breathe." Annie did, and gradually the discomfort faded, replaced by a different kind of awareness. She felt complete in a way she had not known she was incomplete, connected to Frederick in a manner that transcended the physical. "All right?" he asked, his voice strained with the effort of remaining still. "Yes," Annie said. "Yes, you can move." He did, slowly at first, establishing a gentle rhythm that built sensation gradually. Annie's hands gripped his shoulders as pleasure began to spiral through her body. Frederick buried his face in her neck, his breath hot against her skin, whispering her name like a prayer. They moved together, learning each other's rhythms, finding a synchronicity that felt natural and right. Frederick's hand slid between their bodies, touching her in a way that made stars explode behind Annie's eyes. She cried out, her back arching, and he swallowed the sound with a deep kiss. The pleasure built and built until Annie thought she could not contain it, and then it crested, washing over her in waves that left her gasping Frederick's name. He followed moments later, his body shuddering against hers, his arms tightening around her as though he never wanted to let go. Afterward, they lay tangled together, hearts racing, breathing slowly returning to normal. Frederick pulled the blankets over them and gathered Annie close, her head resting on his chest, where she could hear his heartbeat gradually slowing. His hand stroked her hair with infinite tenderness. "I love you," he said quietly. "I did not mean to. I tried not to. But Annie, I love you completely." Tears pricked Annie's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have from the beginning, even when I was too frightened to name it." Frederick tilted her face up and kissed her softly, a kiss full of promise and contentment. "You are mine now," he said, "truly mine, and I am yours. Whatever comes, whatever battles we must fight, we face them together." "Together," Annie agreed, pressing closer to his warmth. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside they had found shelter in each other's arms. This marriage that had begun as convenience, as obligation, had transformed into something far more powerful. They had found love in the most unexpected place, and as Annie drifted towards sleep, wrapped in Frederick's embrace, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would overcome them, because they were no longer two separate people bound by a contract. They were husband and wife in every sense of the word, united by love and trust and the promise of a future they would build together. And nothing, not Lady Charlotte's malice or society's judgment, could tear that apart. Annie woke wrapped in warmth and contentment, Frederick's arm heavy across her waist, his breath soft against her neck. Morning light filtered through the curtains, painting everything in shades of gold. For a moment, she simply existed in that perfect space between sleep and waking, feeling safe and loved in a way she had never imagined possible. Frederick stirred behind her, pressing a kiss to her bare shoulder. "Good morning, wife," he murmured, and the possessiveness in his voice sent pleasant shivers down her spine. "Good morning, husband." He pulled her closer, and Annie felt him smile against her skin. "I do not want to move from this bed. Ever." Annie laughed, turning in his arms to face him. His hair was disheveled, his jaw shadowed with morning stubble, and he looked more relaxed than she had ever seen him. Unfortunately, dukes have responsibilities, as do duchesses, apparently. "Responsibilities can wait," Frederick said, lowering his mouth to hers for a slow, thorough kiss that made Annie forget why leaving the bed had seemed important. They were still tangled together when the urgent knocking came. "Your Grace," Mrs. Hartley's voice carried through the door, strained with worry. "Forgive the interruption, but there is a matter that requires immediate attention." Frederick's expression darkened. He kissed Annie's forehead and reluctantly pulled away, reaching for his discarded clothes. "I will handle whatever this is," he said. "You rest." But Annie was already sitting up, pulling the sheet around herself. "We handle it together. Remember." Something soft and grateful crossed his face. He nodded. Together. 20 minutes later, they sat in Frederick's study, both dressed but still carrying the glow of the night before. Mrs. Hartley stood before them, wringing her hands, while Frederick's solicitor, Mr. Pemberton, an elderly man with kind eyes, held an official-looking document. "I'm afraid this is quite serious, Your Grace," Mr. Pemberton said. "Lady Charlotte Pemberton has filed a complaint with the Bishop of Winchester, claiming that your marriage to Miss Bennet, forgive me, to Her Grace the Duchess, was conducted under duress." "Duress?" Frederick's voice was dangerously quiet. On what possible grounds? She claims that Miss Bennet, that is, Her Grace, was coerced into the marriage due to her desperate circumstances, and that you took advantage of her vulnerable position. She has requested the bishop investigate whether the marriage should be annulled on grounds of improper consent. Annie felt ice flood her veins. An annulment would mean their marriage never existed, that the night they had just shared would be rendered meaningless in the eyes of the law and church. That is absurd, Frederick said, standing abruptly. Annie came to me of her own free will. She accepted my proposal with full understanding of the arrangement. There was no coercion. I believe you, Your Grace, Mr. Pemberton said gently. But Lady Charlotte has influence with certain church officials. She is painting a picture of a young, desperate orphan girl being taken advantage of by a powerful nobleman. It is, unfortunately, a narrative that carries weight. There is more, Mrs. Hartley added quietly. Lady Charlotte has also contacted the Ashford Bank. She has called in a substantial loan that your father took out years ago, Your Grace. The bank is now demanding immediate repayment of £20,000. Frederick went very still. Annie watched the colour drain from his face. That loan was not due for another 5 years. Lady Charlotte sits on the bank's board of directors. She has convinced them that your recent marriage represents a change in financial circumstances that triggers the acceleration clause. They want the full amount within 60 days, or they will begin foreclosure proceedings on portions of the estate. Annie stood and went to Frederick, taking his hand. It was cold and rigid. We will fight this, she said firmly. Both of these attacks. We will prove our marriage is legitimate, and we will find a way to manage the debt. Frederick looked at her, and Annie saw the fear there, the same terror she had felt when that glass panel had nearly crushed her. But this time, it was not fear for himself. It was fear of losing her, of having what they had just found torn away by malice and manipulation. Charlotte is trying to destroy us, he said quietly. She wants to humiliate me, bankrupt the estate and annul our marriage. She wants to take everything. Then she will learn that we are not so easily broken, Annie replied. We have something she does not understand. We have each other. Mr. Pemberton cleared his throat. With your permission, Your Grace, I will begin preparing a response to the bishop. We will need testimony from both of you, as well as from anyone who witnessed your courtship and marriage. We must demonstrate that the Duchess entered into this union willingly and with full comprehension of her choices. Do whatever is necessary, Frederick said. Spare no expense. I will not lose her. His grip on Annie's hand tightened and she squeezed back, trying to convey strength and reassurance. What about the loan? Annie asked. £20,000 is a fortune. How can we possibly raise that amount in 60 days? We can sell some of the outlying properties, Frederick said, his mind already working through possibilities. Perhaps some of the artwork, the silver collection. We will have to make sacrifices, but it can be done. There may be another option, Mr. Pemberton said hesitantly. Your mother's collection of rare books in the library. I have heard collectors express interest in the past. Some of those volumes are quite valuable. No, Frederick said immediately. Those books were her pride. I cannot sell them. Frederick, Annie said softly, they are just things. Books can be replaced. Our life together cannot. He looked at her with anguish in his eyes. You do not understand. That library was how I survived after my mother died, after I lost Evelyn. Those books were my refuge, my solace. Selling them feels like losing the last piece of who I was before grief hollowed me out. Annie moved closer, her free hand coming up to touch his face. But you are not that hollow man anymore, she said. You have me now. We will build new refuges, new solaces, together. And if we must sacrifice some of the past to secure our future, then that is what we do. Frederick closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. When did you become so wise? I learned from a very intelligent man, Annie said. One who taught me that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let go of what we cannot keep in order to protect what matters most. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. I will not let Charlotte win, he said fiercely. I will not let her take you from me. Whatever I must do, whatever I must sacrifice, I will keep you safe, and I will stand beside you through all of it, Annie promised. We face this together, just as we face everything. Mrs. Hartley dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. If I may say so, Your Grace, Her Grace, you are the strongest couple I have seen in all my years of service. That woman has no idea what she has unleashed. Mr. Pemberton nodded agreement. I will begin the preparations immediately. In the meantime, it would be wise to gather any documentation that supports the legitimacy of your marriage. Letters, witnesses, anything that demonstrates the genuine nature of your relationship. After they left, Annie and Frederick remained standing together in the study, holding each other as though they could ward off the coming storm through sheer force of will. I am sorry, Frederick said quietly. I brought you into my life to protect you, and instead I have made you a target. Annie pulled back to look at him. You gave me a home, a name, a future, and more than that, you gave me love. Whatever Lady Charlotte throws at us, it is worth it. You are worth it. He kissed her then, soft and deep, a kiss that spoke of fear and determination and unwavering devotion. We will survive this, he said when they finally parted, and when we do, I swear to you, Charlotte will regret the day she decided to make an enemy of us. But even as Annie nodded agreement, unease settled in her stomach. Lady Charlotte was powerful, connected, ruthless. She had already demonstrated her willingness to use any weapon at her disposal. And Annie could not shake the feeling that they had not yet seen the worst of what she was capable of. Outside the study window, storm clouds gathered once more, and Annie wondered if they would ever truly escape the tempest that had been unleashed. But as long as Frederick's hand held hers, as long as they faced each threat as one united front, she had to believe they stood a chance. They had to. Because the alternative, losing him after just discovering what love truly meant, was simply unthinkable. The following week passed in a blur of legal preparations and financial calculations. Frederick spent hours with Mr. Pemberton drafting responses to the bishop's inquiry, while Annie worked with the estate manager to catalogue items that could be sold if necessary. They fell into bed exhausted each night, finding comfort in each other's arms, even as worry gnawed at them both. On the 8th day, salvation came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Hartley knocked on the library door where Annie and Frederick were reviewing account books. Her face was flushed with excitement, and behind her stood a young woman Annie recognized from the market, a shopkeeper's daughter named Grace. Your Graces forgive the interruption, Mrs. Hartley said, but Miss Grace has information I believe you must hear. Grace stepped forward nervously, clutching a worn leather satchel to her chest. She curtsied awkwardly. Your Grace, Your Grace. She looked between them uncertainly. I hope I am not being too forward, but after what you did at the market standing up to Lady Charlotte, I felt I had to come forward. Please, Annie said gently. Sit. Tell us what you know. Grace perched on the edge of a chair, the satchel still held tightly. My uncle worked as a clerk for Lady Charlotte's late husband. When the old Baron died 3 years ago, my uncle helped settle the estate. He found irregularities in some of Lady Charlotte's land acquisitions, properties she obtained from an elderly gentleman named Lord Bartlett. Frederick leaned forward, his attention sharpening. What kind of irregularities? Grace opened the satchel and pulled out several documents, spreading them on the desk. Lord Bartlett was suffering from dementia in his final years. His family was concerned that Lady Charlotte had befriended him specifically to gain access to his properties. These documents show that she acquired 3 valuable estates for a fraction of their worth, all signed when Lord Bartlett was barely lucid. My uncle kept copies because he believed it was wrong, but Lord Bartlett's family never pursued legal action. They were too frightened of Lady Charlotte's influence. Annie and Frederick exchanged glances. This was exactly what they needed. Why did your uncle not come forward before? Frederick asked. He died 6 months ago, sir. Heart failure. But before he passed, he gave me these papers and told me that if I ever had the chance to stop Lady Charlotte from hurting anyone else, I should use them. When I heard what she was trying to do to you both, I knew this was that chance. Frederick stood and took Grace's hands in both of his. You are extraordinarily brave, Miss Grace. This evidence could change everything. Will it help you fight her? Grace asked anxiously. It will, Annie said firmly. Thank you. You have no idea what this means to us. After Grace left with Frederick's promise of protection and a generous reward, Annie and Frederick sat staring at the documents spread before them. We take these to the magistrate immediately, Frederick said. If we can prove Charlotte obtained property through fraud, her credibility will be destroyed. The bishop will never take her accusations seriously. And the bank might reconsider the loan acceleration, Annie added, if her position on the board is compromised. Frederick pulled Annie into his arms, burying his face in her hair. We have a chance now. A real chance. But their relief was short-lived. That night, Annie woke to the smell of smoke. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming, but then Frederick bolted upright beside her, his body going rigid. Fire, he said, already moving toward the door. Stay here. Absolutely not, Annie said, grabbing her robe. Where you go, I go. They ran into the corridor and found chaos. Smoke billowed from the direction of the east wing, thick and acrid. Servants rushed past carrying buckets of water. Mrs. Hartley appeared through the haze, her face streaked with soot. The old servants' quarters, Your Grace. Someone started a fire deliberately. We saw a man running from the scene. Frederick's face went white. That is where we stored the items to be sold, the artwork, the silver. And the documents from Grace, Annie said, horror flooding through her. We left them in the study, which connects to the east wing. Without another word, they ran toward the study. Heat rolled down the corridor in waves, and smoke made breathing difficult. Frederick kicked open the study door and was driven back by a wall of flames. The entire room was engulfed, fire consuming books and furniture with terrifying speed. The documents, Frederick said desperately. We need those documents. It is too late, Annie coughed, pulling him back. The room is lost. No. Frederick tried to push forward again, but Annie and two footmen physically restrained him. Your Grace, you will die if you go in there, one of the footmen shouted. It is not worth your life. Outside, bells rang as villagers responded to the alarm. Within an hour, a bucket line stretched from the manor to the nearest well, dozens of people fighting to contain the blaze. Frederick worked alongside them, his face grim and determined, while Annie coordinated efforts to move valuable items from threatened areas. By dawn, the fire was finally contained. The east wing was gutted, the study completely destroyed, but the rest of the manor had been saved. Everyone collapsed in exhaustion, covered in soot and ash. That is when the groundskeeper appeared, dragging a man by the collar. The captive was young, roughly dressed, with wild eyes and burns on his hands. Found him trying to escape through the south gardens, Your Grace, the groundskeeper said. He reeks of lamp oil. Frederick approached the man slowly, and even through his exhaustion, Annie could see rage burning in his eyes. Who sent you? Frederick demanded. The man spat at his feet. I do not have to tell you nothing. You set fire to my home. You could have killed innocent people. You will tell me who hired you, or I will have you charged with attempted murder. The man's bravado cracked slightly. You cannot prove nothing. Your hands are burned from setting the fire, Annie said, moving to stand beside Frederick. Your clothes smell of the same lamp oil used to start the blaze, and you were fleeing the scene. A magistrate will have no difficulty proving your guilt. She is right, Frederick added. You will hang for this, unless you cooperate. Tell us who hired you, and I will recommend leniency. The man looked between them, fear finally overcoming loyalty. It was a woman. Fine lady she was. Paid me £50 to start a fire in the east wing. Said to make sure it looked like an accident, but to be certain the study burned completely. She said there were papers there that needed destroying. Did she give her name? Annie asked, though she already knew the answer. Lady Charlotte Pemberton. She said you would be ruined when those papers burned, that the Duke would lose everything. Frederick's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained controlled. Take him to the constable, and send word to Mr. Pemberton immediately. I want Lady Charlotte arrested for arson and attempted murder. After the man was led away, Frederick turned to Annie. He looked utterly exhausted, his face smudged with soot, his eyes red from smoke. But beneath the exhaustion burned a fury Annie had never seen before. She tried to kill us, he said quietly. She set fire to our home to destroy evidence of her own crimes. She could have killed servants, killed you. There is no line she will not cross. But she failed, Annie said. The manor still stands. We are alive, and now we have proof of her involvement. That man will testify against her. The documents are gone. Our evidence against her is destroyed. Annie took his hands, looking up at him with determination. Then we find Lord Bartlett's family. We convince them to come forward. Grace's testimony combined with theirs should be sufficient. And now we can add arson, and attempted murder to the charges against Charlotte. She has overreached, Frederick. In trying to destroy us, she has destroyed herself. He pulled her close, and Annie felt him trembling against her. I could have lost you tonight if the fire had spread faster, if we had not woken in time. But we did. We survived. And tomorrow we fight back. As the sun rose over the damaged manor, servants began the work of cleaning and repair. But Annie and Frederick stood together in what remained of the study, looking at the charred ruins of books and furniture. "This was my sanctuary," Frederick said softly. "The place I came to escape, and she destroyed it." "Then we will build a new sanctuary," Annie said. "One with new memories, new books, new hope. She cannot take our future, Frederick. She can only destroy the past." He turned to her, and in the morning light Annie saw something shift in his expression. The anger was still there, but beneath it was steel, determination, and unwavering resolve. "You are right. We end this now. No more defense. We go on the attack." "Together?" Annie asked. "Always together," Frederick confirmed. As they walked back to their rooms to clean and prepare for the battle ahead, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the tree line beyond the manor grounds. Lady Charlotte stood in the shadows, her face twisted with rage as she saw the Duke and Duchess emerge from the damaged wing, alive and united. Her plan had failed. The fire had not killed them, had not broken them. If anything, they seemed stronger, more determined. But Charlotte was not finished. Not yet. If she could not destroy them with fire or legal maneuvering, she would take everything from them in front of the entire county. The hearing was in 3 days. And Charlotte had one final weapon to deploy, one that would shatter the Duke's carefully constructed defense and reveal his Duchess for the desperate fraud Charlotte knew her to be. She smiled coldly in the morning light and turned back toward her carriage. The war was not over. It had only just begun. The county courthouse had never seen such a crowd. Every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls and spilling into the corridors beyond. News of the Duke of Ashford's marriage, Lady Charlotte's accusations, and the fire at the manor had spread through the region like wildfire. Everyone wanted to witness the spectacle. Annie sat beside Frederick at the front of the courtroom, her hand clasped tightly in his. She wore a simple but elegant dress in deep blue, her hair arranged with careful dignity. Frederick had insisted she look every inch the Duchess she was, and Mrs. Hartley had risen to the challenge. Across the aisle, Lady Charlotte sat with her solicitor, dressed in black silk that seemed to swallow the light. Her face was a mask of composed confidence, but Annie caught the flash of venom in her eyes when their gazes met. The magistrate, Lord Justice Harrington, entered, and the room fell silent. He was an elderly man with shrewd eyes and a reputation for fairness that had made him respected throughout 3 counties. "We are here to examine 2 related matters," he announced, his voice carrying easily through the hushed room. "First, the petition by Lady Charlotte Pemberton to investigate the marriage of Frederick Ashford, Duke of Ashford, to Miss Annie Bennet, now Duchess of Ashford, on grounds of improper consent. Second, charges of arson and conspiracy to commit murder against the same Lady Charlotte Pemberton." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was more drama than most of them had seen in years. "We shall begin with the petition regarding the marriage. Lady Charlotte, you may present your case." Charlotte's solicitor stood, a thin man with a reedy voice. "Your Honor, my client seeks to protect a vulnerable young woman from exploitation. Miss Bennet was destitute, orphaned, and facing imminent homelessness when she appeared at Ashford Manor. The Duke, a man of significant power and wealth, offered marriage as the only means of survival. Such circumstances cannot constitute free consent. Miss Bennet had no real choice but to accept, making this marriage a form of coercion. Annie felt Frederick tense beside her, but he remained silent, trusting their strategy. "Do you have evidence of this coercion?" Lord Justice Harrington asked. "The circumstances speak for themselves, Your Honor. A desperate woman, a powerful man. An arrangement that benefits him by silencing society's demands for an heir, while providing him with a convenient, compliant wife who will not challenge his authority." "That is enough," the magistrate said. "I will hear from the Duke and Duchess themselves. Your Grace, please approach." Frederick stood, bringing Annie with him. They faced the magistrate together, and Annie felt strength flowing between them through their joined hands. "Your Grace," Lord Justice Harrington said, addressing Frederick, "tell me in your own words the circumstances of your marriage." Frederick's voice was clear and steady. "My wife's father, Thomas Bennet, saved my life 5 years ago during an accident on my estate. He refused any reward at the time. When Annie came to me after her father's death, she mentioned his name and asked only for help. I could have given her employment, a cottage, a small pension. Instead, I offered marriage because I was weary of society's endless matchmaking and saw in her something I had not found in any suitable lady presented to me: honesty, courage, and strength of character. And did you inform her that she had other options? That you could provide assistance without marriage? I did. I made it clear that our marriage would be one of convenience initially, that she would have her own quarters and complete autonomy, that nothing would be required of her beyond appearing as my wife in public functions." The magistrate turned to Annie. "Your Grace, did you feel coerced into this marriage?" Annie lifted her chin and met his eyes directly. "No, Your Honor. I felt grateful and honestly confused as to why someone of the Duke's stature would make such an offer. But he gave me time to consider. He explained the terms clearly. He promised me safety and respect, and he has kept every promise. I married him because I chose to, because I trusted him, and because I believed we could build something meaningful together. And have you? Built something meaningful?" Annie turned to look at Frederick, and she did not have to fake the emotion in her voice. "I have found more than I ever imagined possible. I have found a partner, a friend, and the great love of my life. If that is coercion, Your Honor, then I am grateful for it." A ripple of whispers moved through the courtroom. Lord Justice Harrington studied them both with keen eyes. "Lady Charlotte," he said, "I see before me two people who clearly care for each other deeply. Unless you have evidence of actual coercion, threats, or manipulation, I am inclined to dismiss your petition." Charlotte stood abruptly. "They are performing for you, Your Honor. This is all an act designed to protect the Duke's reputation and secure the girl's position." She was desperate. That alone constitutes duress. "Was I under duress as well?" Frederick asked, his voice cutting. "I chose Annie. I pursued her consent, not the other way around. If anyone wielded power in that arrangement, it was me. Should I be punished for using that power to help someone I respected, rather than to exploit her?" Mr. Pemberton stood from the gallery. "Your Honor, I have testimony from the Duke's household staff. They will attest that the Duke and Duchess have developed a genuine affection for each other, that their relationship has grown beyond the initial arrangement, and that the Duchess has been treated with nothing but respect and care." "I also have testimony," Charlotte snapped, "from servants who witnessed the girl arriving in rags, desperate and manipulative." "Those servants no longer work for me," Frederick said coldly, "because they were spreading malicious gossip. I wonder who encouraged them to do so." The magistrate raised his hand for silence. "I have heard enough regarding the marriage. Without concrete evidence of coercion or duress, and given the clear affection between the Duke and Duchess, I find no grounds to investigate further. The marriage stands as legal and valid." Relief flooded through Annie, so intense she swayed slightly. Frederick steadied her, his arm coming around her waist. "Now," the magistrate continued, his expression hardening, "let us address the more serious matter, the charges of arson." Charlotte's face paled. Mr. Pemberton stood again. "Your Honor, 3 nights ago, Ashford Manor was deliberately set on fire. A man was apprehended fleeing the scene. He has confessed to being hired by Lady Charlotte Pemberton to start the fire and specifically to destroy documents in the Duke's study." "That is a lie," Charlotte said, but her voice lacked conviction. "The man is prepared to testify," Mr. Pemberton continued. "He identified Lady Charlotte by name and description. He can describe the meeting where she hired him, the amount she paid, and her specific instructions. Additionally, Your Honor," Frederick said, "we have evidence that Lady Charlotte acquired properties from the late Lord Bartlett through fraudulent means, taking advantage of his diminished mental capacity. Miss Grace Thornton has copies of documents proving these transactions. We believe Lady Charlotte hired the arsonist to destroy the original documents before we could present them as evidence of her character." Lord Justice Harrington's face was grave. "Lady Charlotte, these are extremely serious allegations. Do you have any response?" Charlotte stood rigid, her composure finally cracking. "This is a conspiracy. They are trying to destroy me because I dared question their fraudulent marriage." "If your intentions were pure," the magistrate said, "why would you need to burn evidence? Why would you hire an arsonist who endangered innocent lives?" Charlotte had no answer. For the first time since Annie had known her, the powerful woman looked defeated. Lord Justice Harrington made his decision. "Based on the testimony and evidence presented, I find that Lady Charlotte Pemberton conspired to commit arson with intent to destroy evidence and with reckless disregard for human life. The properties obtained from Lord Bartlett through questionable means are hereby ordered returned to his estate for proper redistribution to his rightful heirs." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the silent courtroom. "Lady Charlotte, you are stripped of your position on the Ashford Bank Board of Directors, effective immediately. The accelerated loan demanded of the Duke of Ashford is hereby cancelled and returned to its original terms. You will pay restitution to the Duke for damages caused by the fire, and you will face criminal charges for conspiracy to commit arson." Charlotte swayed, her face ashen. Her solicitor grabbed her elbow to steady her. "As for you, Your Graces," the magistrate said, his expression softening, "I wish you every happiness in your marriage. It is clear to anyone with eyes that you have found something rare and precious. Do not let the malice of others tarnish it." "Thank you, Your Honor," Frederick said, his voice rough with emotion. As they left the courthouse, the crowd parted before them. Some faces showed approval, others mere curiosity, but no one dared speak against them now. Lady Charlotte's schemes had been exposed, her power broken. Outside in the autumn sunshine, Frederick pulled Annie into his arms and kissed her deeply, not caring who saw. "It is over," he said. "We are free." Annie laughed, tears streaming down her face. "We are free," she agreed. "And we are together." As their carriage rolled toward home, toward the manor that was being rebuilt stronger than before, Annie rested her head on Frederick's shoulder and marveled at how far they had come. She had arrived at Ashford Manor with nothing but desperation and borrowed courage. She was leaving the courthouse as a duchess vindicated, a woman loved, a wife who had fought beside her husband and emerged victorious. And as Frederick's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with perfect familiarity, Annie knew that whatever challenges still lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else. Together, united, and utterly unbreakable. 6 months later, spring had transformed Ashford Manor into something magical. The gardens bloomed with colour, roses climbing the stone walls in shades of crimson and cream, while cherry blossoms drifted like snow across the lawns. The east wing had been rebuilt, better than before, with a new library that soared even higher than the original, filled with books that Frederick and Annie had chosen together. Annie stood at the window of their shared bedroom, watching the morning sun paint everything gold. They no longer maintained separate quarters. Within days of the trial, Frederick had moved his belongings into her rooms, and they had never looked back. Every night she fell asleep in his arms, and every morning she woke to his kisses. She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling the slight swell there that only she and Frederick knew about. Not yet visible beneath her dress, but real and growing and perfect. Today she would tell him. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Hartley entered carrying a breakfast tray, her face beaming with the perpetual joy she had displayed since the trial. "Good morning, Your Grace. His Grace is in the garden. He asks if you will join him when you are ready." "I will go now," Annie said, her heart fluttering with anticipation. She found Frederick beneath the ancient oak tree at the center of the garden, the same tree where he had proposed they plant new roses as a symbol of their fresh beginning. He had kept that promise, and now the roses bloomed in abundance around the trunk. He turned when he heard her approach, and the smile that lit his face still made her breath catch. 6 months of marriage had only made him more handsome in her eyes. The perpetual sadness that had shadowed him was gone, replaced by a contentment that seemed to glow from within. "There you are," he said, pulling her into his arms. "I was beginning to think you had decided to sleep the entire morning away. I was admiring the view from our window. Everything is so beautiful this time of year." "Not as beautiful as you," Frederick murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching birds flit between branches and listening to the distant sound of servants going about their work. Life at Ashford had settled into a peaceful rhythm, one built on love and trust and shared purpose. "Frederick," Annie said softly, "I have something to tell you." He pulled back to look at her, and she saw concern flicker in his grey eyes. "What is it? Are you unwell? You have been tired lately. Should I send for the physician?" Annie laughed, taking his hands and placing them on her stomach. "I have already seen the physician. 2 days ago, actually. I wanted to be certain before I told you." Frederick went very still, his eyes widening as understanding dawned. "Annie, are you saying—" "I am with child," she said, tears of joy gathering in her eyes. "We are going to have a baby, Frederick." For a moment he simply stared at her, and Annie felt a flutter of worry. Perhaps it was too soon. Perhaps he was not ready for this. Then Frederick swept her into his arms, spinning her around with a laugh of pure joy that echoed across the garden. When he set her down, his face was wet with tears. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby. Annie, this is the most wonderful news. You have given me everything. Love, happiness, purpose, and now a child. How did I become so fortunate?" "I ask myself the same question every day," Annie said, wiping tears from his cheeks. "When I think of where I was a year ago, desperate and alone, and where I am now, loved beyond measure, it feels like a dream." Frederick cupped her face in his hands, his expression tender and fierce at once. "You are the bravest person I have ever known. You came to my door with nothing but courage and changed my entire world. You taught me how to live again, how to love again. You fought beside me when enemies tried to tear us apart. And now you are giving me the greatest gift imaginable." He lowered his mouth to hers in a kiss that was reverent and passionate, full of promise and devotion. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "When?" Frederick asked. "When will our child arrive?" "The physician believes late autumn, October or early November." "A harvest baby," Frederick said, wonder in his voice. "Our child will be born as the world prepares for winter, a light in the darkness." "Like you were for me," Annie said softly. "A light when everything seemed dark and hopeless." They walked through the gardens hand in hand, making plans and dreaming of the future. Frederick was already imagining converting one of the nursery rooms, hiring a nurse, ensuring Annie had everything she needed for her comfort during the pregnancy. "You must rest more," he insisted. "No more long days managing the household. Mrs. Hartley can handle everything." "I am pregnant, not fragile," Annie laughed. "But I promise to be sensible." They passed through the rose garden and into the meadow beyond, where wildflowers grew in riotous abundance. This had become their favorite place to walk in the evenings, away from the manor and the eyes of servants. Just the two of them, and the endless sky. "Do you ever think about that night in the conservatory?" Frederick asked suddenly. "When the glass nearly fell on you?" "Often," Annie admitted. "It was the moment everything changed between us. When we stopped pretending our marriage was merely convenient. I was terrified," Frederick said. "In that split second when I saw the panel falling, I realized I could not live without you, that somewhere along the way you had become essential to my existence. That is when I knew I loved you, even though I did not have the courage to say it yet. And I knew I loved you when you protected me without hesitation," Annie replied. "When you risked your own life for mine. That is when I understood this marriage had become real in every way that mattered." Frederick stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I want our child to grow up knowing love," he said. "I want them to see parents who cherish each other, who face challenges together, who build something lasting and true. I want them to understand that real love is not found in grand gestures, but in daily choices, in kindness and respect and unwavering partnership." "They will know all of that," Annie promised, "because they will see it every day in us." As the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in shades of blue and gold, they stood together in the meadow, Frederick's hand resting protectively on Annie's stomach, where their child grew. In the village, people still spoke of the scandalous marriage between the Duke and the orphan girl. But now they spoke with admiration rather than judgment, marveling at how the couple had overcome Lady Charlotte's schemes and emerged stronger than ever. Lady Charlotte herself had left the county in disgrace, her properties sold to pay restitution, her influence shattered beyond repair. Some said she had gone to live with distant relatives in Scotland. Others claimed she had fled to the continent. Annie did not particularly care where she had gone, as long as she stayed away from Ashford. The manor thrived under their joint stewardship. Frederick's business acumen, combined with Annie's practical wisdom, had made the estate more profitable than it had been in decades. They had hired more servants, improved working conditions, and invested in the local community. The people of Ashford Village no longer viewed their Duchess with suspicion, but with genuine affection. As they walked back toward the manor, Annie thought about the frightened girl who had stood at those imposing gates less than a year ago, wondering if she had the courage to ask for help. That girl had been brave, but she had not known her own strength. She had not known she could stand before powerful enemies and refuse to be broken. She had not known she could find a love that would sustain her through any storm, but she knew now. And she would teach that strength to her child, just as Frederick would teach them kindness and honor, and the importance of using power to protect, rather than to dominate. "What are you thinking?" Frederick asked, noticing her distant expression. "I am thinking that I came here looking for shelter," Annie said, "and I found a home. I came looking for survival, and I found a life worth living. I came expecting an arrangement, and I found the love of my lifetime." Frederick pulled her close, his lips brushing her forehead. "You are my home, Annie. You and our child. Everything else is just walls and furniture. You are what makes it matter." As they entered the manor together, servants greeted them with smiles, the household running smoothly under their care. This place that had once felt cold and empty now rang with warmth and laughter. That evening, they sat together in their rebuilt library, Annie reading while Frederick worked on correspondence. But every few minutes he would look up at her, a smile playing at his lips, as though he could not quite believe his good fortune. When the clock struck 10, Frederick closed his ledger and held out his hand. "Come to bed, wife. You need your rest now more than ever." Annie set aside her book and took his hand, allowing him to pull her to her feet and into his arms. "I love you," she said, the words as natural as breathing now. "I love you," Frederick replied. "Both of you." He placed his hand on her stomach, and Annie covered it with her own. This was their family now, built from nothing, forged in fire, and stronger for every challenge they had overcome. As they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, Annie looked back at the library one last time, at the books and firelight in the chairs, where they had first begun to fall in love. "They said you need a wife," she had whispered in desperation all those months ago. And Frederick had whispered back, in ways both spoken and unspoken, that he needed her specifically. Not a wife in the abstract, but Annie. Her courage, her honesty, her fierce loyalty and gentle heart. She had come to Ashford Manor with nothing and gained everything. And as she lay in Frederick's arms that night, his hand resting protectively over their child, Annie knew that their story was just beginning. The best chapters were still ahead of them, waiting to be written together. Annie arrived at Ashford Manor believing she was asking for charity, never imagining she was walking toward destiny. She thought courage meant knocking on that imposing door. She did not yet know that real courage would mean opening her heart to a man who had forgotten how to love, standing beside him when enemies tried to tear them apart, and choosing hope even when everything seemed lost. Frederick offered marriage as a solution to practical problems, but somewhere between the library conversations and the storm that tore away their defenses, convenience transformed into devotion. He learned that protecting his heart meant closing himself off from life itself, and that the greatest risk was also the greatest reward. Their story reminds us that love rarely arrives in the package we expect. Sometimes it comes dressed in desperation and rain-soaked dresses. Sometimes it hides behind walls of grief and carefully constructed distance. And sometimes the person who saves us is the one we thought needed saving. What began with those trembling words, "They said you need a wife," became a testament to the power of choosing each other every single day. Through scandal and fire, through legal battles and social ostracism, Annie and Frederick proved that true partnership is not about perfection, but about standing together when everything tries to push you apart. In the end, Annie did not just find shelter. She found her voice, her strength, and a love that would echo through generations. And Frederick discovered that the heart he thought died with his first love was simply waiting for someone brave enough to bring it back to life. Their daughter was born on a crisp October morning, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's gentle smile. They named her Grace, after the young woman whose courage had helped save them, and she grew up in a house filled with love, laughter, and the knowledge that the strongest foundations are built not on privilege or power, but on choosing each other, again and again, no matter what storms may come. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like. It helps me know that these stories of courage and love matter to you. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another journey into the hearts of people who dared to love against all odds. And I would love to know, where in the world are you listening to this story? Drop a comment with your city or country. Knowing you are out there connecting with these characters across miles and time zones makes every story I share more meaningful. Thank you for spending this time with Annie and Frederick. Until the next story, may you find your own courage when you need it most.